Now we come to the trial of Jesus, and we get the feeling the whole way through this chapter that John was an eyewitness to these events in ways that the other gospel writers just weren't. And the reason for that is given in verse 16. He says, the other disciple, that's John, was known to the high priest. He knew the prime minister, and that gave him access to the palaces of power. So he tells us a lot of things the others don't tell us. He tells us that Peter began in the outer court, and it was only through John's influence that he was brought into the inner court, where he could see Jesus, although from a distance. Only John tells us that the third person who asked Peter if he was a disciple was a relative of the one whose ear had been cut off, and only John tells us that that man's name was Malchus. But John was close to the proceedings and could hear what was going on. Only John tells us that Jesus asked Annas, "Why do you question me? I did everything in public. Ask those who heard me, they will tell you." What Jesus is doing is he's asking for a fair trial. He's saying, let's get to the truth here. John is very preoccupied with the subject of truth. But this is an illegal trial. It was illegal to hold a trial at nighttime because witnesses couldn't come forward. And only John tells us that at that question, an official of the high priest struck Jesus across the face. Have you ever seen someone slapped across the face in real anger? I saw it once. It made me sick to my stomach and I couldn't sleep that night. This is the first time the Son of God was struck, and it won't be the last. And then we move on to the palace of Pilate, and only John tells us that the people wouldn't go to the inner court because that would make them ceremonially unclean. How hypocritical is that? They are so concerned with all their petty laws about clean and unclean, and there were hundreds of those laws, and yet they're involved in this very dirty business. And only John hears them say, "We have no right to execute anyone." That was a straight lie. 3 years later, they executed Stephen by stoning him, and the Romans didn't turn a hair. The issue here is that they did not want to be seen to be responsible for death. They wanted Pilate to be seen to be responsible. And Pilate wouldn't be responsible, so he washed his hands. A lot of hand washing went on that night. And then only John tells us of Pilate's epic question, what is truth? What indeed? John is very preoccupied with the question of truth. He believes that truth sets free and untruth binds. That it matters very much what you believe. It's a matter of life and death. And the world is in serious trouble at the moment. Truth, even sheer facts, are under question. And we need to be careful that we don't be part of that in any way. I'm quite concerned about how very intelligent people are passing on WhatsApps that at one glance you can tell are not true, or at least are very slanted. There's a kind of hysterical tone to them, and we need to be sure to protect truth. And so John tells us all of these things that enrich our knowledge of this story. But then there are a number of things that are told in all four Gospels. The betrayal by Judas, although John doesn't mention the kiss. But that made such an impact on the disciples. That action, that like Pearl Harbor, will live in infamy. And then all of them tell us about Peter's weaknesses, that he stood warming himself while his Lord stood shivering in front of his accusers because they'd taken off his outer garment, that he denied 3 times, that his first denial was to a servant girl. Really, Peter, a girl. And all four Gospels tell us that the cock crowed. The cock crows for us too. And all four Gospels tell us that the crowd shouted for Barabbas. And that shout has echoed down the century as the cry of a world rejecting the Christ. When he created us, he gave us a free will that we could choose to accept or reject him, and he's never withdrawn that free will. And here's the thing. Jesus knew how many would reject him, and yet he went through it all.